Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's discussion on Calcutta on Your Plate, a Bengali culinary journey. I'm Kirsten Hamann. I'm Pegasus Professor and Associate Dean in the College of Sciences, and I serve as the Interim Director of the India Center at the University of Central Florida. It is an honor to welcome Nilosree Biswas as the speaker of our India Center event today. The India Center at UCF broadens the understanding and awareness of contemporary India. It promotes the study of India in the world today and the relationship between the United States and India through partnerships, scholarship and research, education, and outreach. Today's event promises to whet our appetites for delicious Bengali food, but also for exploring the political and social history of the region. And I can't think of a better way to explore a place than through its cuisine, as food culture is a reflection of so many factors that result in culinary traditions. Welcome again. Thank you for joining us today. And it is now my pleasure to welcome Laila Chakko, the Director of Public Affairs of the India Center, who will introduce our guests. Our speaker, Nilosree Biswas and Faiyaz Kara, who will moderate the event. I hope you will enjoy the discussion. Laila?
Thanks, Kirsten. Good morning, everyone. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce our speakers today. Before we introduce them, I would like to announce that today's session is being recorded for our website. And also we'll have time at the end of the discussion for questions for the speakers. So you can use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen for questions to go to the moderator. First, I'd like to introduce Faiyaz Kara, who'll be leading today's conversation as the moderator. Faiyaz is a writer, editor, and journalist who started his career in journalism in Toronto, Canada. He's the Orlando Weekly's restaurant critic and a go-to source for food happenings within Central Florida. And he's also the author of Gourmet Breakfast for the Genius, which I was just referencing this weekend. Nilosree Biswas is an author and filmmaker trained in comparative literature and cinema. She writes about history, culture, art history, food and cinema of South Asia. Her books include Benares, Of Gods, Humans, and Stories, and Alluring Kashmir, The Inner Spirit, co-written with Irfan Nabi. Nilosree has had documentaries showcased at the Cannes Film Festival and archived by the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. She is currently working on her next book with themes related to colonial Bengal. Now, please join me in giving a virtual warm welcome to Nilosree and Faiyaz. I'll hand it over to Faiyaz now.
Well, thank you so much, Laila, and thank you to everyone out there for joining us today on this this early morning for this very special event. Nilosree's book takes a very deep dive into the colonial and conqueror influences of Bengali cuisine and the intersectional sort of factors that, as you've said, Nilosree, shape the gastronomic narrative of Calcutta. So I was wondering that for the benefit of those people joining us today that may not know very much about Calcutta or Bengal, I wonder if you could perhaps talk a bit about Bengal's endowed geography, as you say in the book, and its fortuitous locale as a sort of primer for the rest of our conversation.
I think it's a very pertinent question. And firstly, I'm so glad to be here. So it's a pertinent question because even before we understand food, we need to understand the geographical specifics of any region, because I deeply believe that food originates primarily from the geographical features, geomorphological features. As we have seen it time and again that depending where the place is located, if it's a desert or a mountainous place or it's a riverine place, the food habits are influenced from these geographical identities, I would say, or factors, I would say. So Bengal is at the lower portion of this Gangetic plain, and there's this river which is in the name of Hooghly, which pours out to Bay of Bengal, all undivided Bengal, all which is present-day Bangladesh and West Bengal. So it takes us back into that time and space. It's a very riverine, full of rivulets, freshwater streams, ponds, lots of water bodies, and agriculturally very fertile region with a lot of silt and alluvial soil. So the growth of rice, vegetables, very green, as some of you may know, and so much green that it may actually tire your eyes at times. But nevertheless, it's extremely green. It has a bountiful of monsoon, which also facilitates the growth of various kind of vegetables, greens. Even paddy needs a lot of water in its agriculture. So I think when we dive in more into the food journey of Kolkata, which is now Kolkata, erstwhile Calcutta, we will see that how the food choices had deep connect with what the Bengalis were eating. And then, of course, we will talk about the influences as well.
Well, let's talk a bit about those influences. So, much of your book talks about just that, the influence of the Mughals, the European colonizers, the immigration from China and Armenia and Afghanistan and all these other places as transforming Bengali cuisine. So have you found that, I don't know, as you talk to people, Bengalis who have read the book, that particularly those with a strong sense of this Amadar Khabar, this our foods sort of concept, have you found that as you talk to them that there's been a sort of, I don't know, reconciliation or a rethinking of Amadar Khabar?
Interestingly, Amadar Khabar is a very fluid concept also. Because through the research, I have spoken to so many people from various backgrounds, starting from grandmothers in families, friends, people who are professionally associated with food industry, then loads and loads of sweet meat makers who form a very important strata of Bengali food. Everybody remembers food with memory, connects food with memory. What they have eaten during their childhood days or during their formative years is to them Amadar Khabar. That's one micro level understanding. And then there is another macro level understanding, which is Amadar Khabar for the people who belong to East Bengal, now Bangladesh, and then the people who were living in West Bengal, which is now Calcutta, and the various districts of West Bengal now, which is Bardhaman, and then Bankura and Purulia, and all these places, they have again their Amadar Khabar. So Amadar Khabar is never a homogeneous thing, and yet it is homogeneous when it was in early 20th century, when we were all the influences were assimilated and a general palette was developed of what Bengalis would eat. So if you are a guest in Kolkata, the standard platter that you would be served on a festival menu, or otherwise if you are invited by someone, is going to be the standardized Amadar Khabar. But if you go deep into it, Amadar Khabar also has little sub Amadar Khabars to everyone. Like every region in current day Bangladesh would have our kind of food. For example, my grandmother hailed from the Barisal district in Bangladesh, my maternal grandmother, and my paternal grandma hailed from Mymensingh. So they had two different kinds of food being cooked on an everyday basis. So when I was discussing this with my maternal grandmother, she used to be very proud of certain dishes, which was very specific to Bengal. So for her, her identity and her food is Borishal, and then what she carries over when she comes to Calcutta as a young student in early 40s. So that's becomes her Amader Khabar. And then when today you would meet a Bengali, there will be certain standard food in the discussion as well as in the serving, which may mean to a visitor as Amader Khabar. So there's this very complex understanding of what is our food.
Maybe I should simplify what I was trying to get at was that as most Calcuttans, they have a this very strong obsession with food, and that's kind of become part of their identity. So are most Calcuttans aware or have a good sense of their city's rich food history and pedigree?
Yes, they do have, to some extent they do have, especially they have because other than rice, the rice and rice platter, the two most popular food, two kinds of popular food is the Chinese Indian food, the Indian Chinese range of noodles and fried rice and what all the Chinese immigrants have given to
Like
us.
Hakka.
And the other one is the biryani. The Kolkata biryani is immensely popular. I would say for some people it is Amader Khabar totally, and that is what Wajid Ali Shah had brought in with his people, with his Awadhi cuisine. It has come to Kolkata. So I think they have a broad understanding of what forms their palate at the moment. But if you are going to ask, if you are really asking that whether they have a conscious understanding of what the history is, I don't think all over the world people are very conscious of the historical background of how food evolves. So in a way, they know certain things, and then they're always curious because they're foodie as a community. So they're always curious to know the food stories. And the book, perhaps at some level, tells the story, gives them a recall of the stories that they may be interested while having something which they otherwise eat almost very now and then.
And so it's interesting you mentioned Wajid Ali Khan, and I have some notes here that he was the Nawab of Awad, and a Nawab being a sort of like a governor, a nobleman type of figure, and Awad being the region in India, of course. And so so this man, who was a bit of an epicure to say the least, he was exiled by the British to the outskirts of Calcutta. And in the book, you say that he is sort of responsible for, quote, reinventing the foodscape of Calcutta. So maybe you could talk a bit about this man and how he influenced the kitchens of Babus and the city's sort of elite class.
I mean, no food discussion about Calcutta is will remain incomplete unless we have a little chat over this gentleman called Nawab Wajid Ali Shah. He was the last king of India in the sense Awadh is the current present-day Lucknow and the adjoining areas. So before it was annexed and before he was deported to Kolkata, first he was imprisoned in Fort William for a couple of months. And then when he was released, he was in a house arrest kind of a situation in the western part of the city, which is now currently a part of the main city only, very close to River Hooghly or the Ganges. Either ways you can call the river, but mostly local people would call it as Hooghly. So he was there, he was located, and he was somebody who in Urdu he was shauqeen, or he was a connoisseur of all fine things, which means he was actually a great foodie. He was a music lover, and his life in Lucknow was full of fine things of life. He was himself a poet, and he had used the nom de plume called Akhtar Pia. He used to write poetry in Farsi and Urdu and Braj Bhasha, which is the local dialect of Eastern UP. When he came to Calcutta, when he settled in Metia Buruj, one of the most important things which he really wanted to do is to transform that little pocket where he lived into a second Lucknow. So what happened in the process is that nearly 500 to 700 people of his court followed him to Kolkata to be with him, to recreate exactly the life he led there in Lucknow. So he had his rakabdars, he had his khansamas, he had his musicians, everybody was there to give him the feel that he was not dislodged from Lucknow. So what he did is, once he came into the zone and once he settled and all his food was, there was a standing instruction that his food would be a replicate of what he used to have in Lucknow, which means fine pulaus, beautiful meat dishes, very delicious platter of sweets and all. But he was far away from the main city. The city was then divided in pockets. And so in the northern part of the city were the Bengali elites. So how would they get connected? One of the biggest connections which they had amongst each other was the music, because Calcutta was also one of those, I would say it was high on socializing. The Babus and elites were partying always. So they had huge music recitals, and the Notch parties, which is a colonial term of the mujras and the musical majlish and all of that. And so these are the binding factors through which through the entertainment that people, the elites, would go to Metia Buruj to hear out the musical and the dance Kathak sessions. And in turn, some musicians would be in their space. And also the famous Tawaifs of Lucknow used to visit the Bengali Babus and elites during Durga Puja and other festivities of Bengal to perform. They were hired all the way from Lucknow and Agra. So there was this whole network of entertainment through which the food flowed in and out of Metia Buruj and Lucknow. So on one route is from Lucknow to Kolkata, the other route is from Wajid Ali's kitchen to outside. And then when he died and when he was no more, his entire team of chefs and gourmet chefs and everyone moved out of that enclosed ambience, and the food percolated into the public spaces. And that's how the biryani, the kebabs, and the rezalas of the world got percolated in Kolkata's food scene slowly towards late 19th century and early 20th century.
In regards to Calcutta's food scene, so as I was reading your book, it kept bringing up this idea of authenticity, or authenticity 2.0, and that no cuisine or culture is static. It's constantly flowing. So given the amount of eating that you've done in Calcutta, I'm sure for guys, there's even research for your book, I'm sure. How would you define authenticity in Calcuttan cuisine?
Again, it's a very interesting question, because as a researcher 4 years or 5 years back, when I was seriously looking into this, I was meeting a lot of people. A very simple example can possibly explain possibly give you the answer, is that when you go to someone's house and they offer you a fish curry, which is one of the very usual staple food of the Bengalis. So the fish curry would have a carp category fish, a rohu or a katla, as they call locally, and it can have potatoes as a part of the curry, or it can have bottle gourd, it can have any other vegetable. So I realized after a point of time that there is no such authenticity per se in the food that we eat on an everyday basis. Every homemaker, every woman of the house has her own little alteration of spices. The fact that it is available in Bengal is the only geographic authenticity we have. Therefore, for example, there is Rasgulla, which is the legendary sweet, and that it originated in Bengal, or that it was popularized. Again, if there is somebody from Orissa here or listening, there would be a great debate whether it belonged to Orissa or it belonged to Bengal. So let me put it this way, that it was popularized in Bengal, and it became very famous all over the world. That it is available in Bengal is the only possible geographic authenticity. But when you come to everyday food, making of any vegetables, making of any dal or pulses or any kind of delicacy, there is a little difference that each family would go by. Like the meat curry, the kosha mangsho, or one of the most popular meat dishes, would have alteration of khada masala or whole spices, is different whole spices added. Some people may use nutmeg in it, some people may not use nutmeg in it, but that Bengalis have kosha mangsho in their food platter is the only authenticity in that sense.
So now you're getting into some food specifics, and that's what I wanted to get into as well. Especially these foods that have become integral to Calcuttan cuisine and indeed Indian cuisine as a whole. The first being cheese, because who doesn't love cheese, right? So I was wondering if you could talk a bit about how cheese came to be in Bengal and how it led to the rise of a very thriving sweetmeats industry.
Sweet, everybody knows that Bengal is very famous for sweets.
Mm-hmm.
And Bengal was always famous for sweets. In the sense, even before the current sweetmeat industry actually formed and became so distinct and became so world famous, Bengal had a consumption of sweets right from medieval ages. The records tell, the Mangal Kavyas and the medieval literature records consumption of sweets. Only that it mentions, because there was no refined sugar, so the sweet is the sweet element is the molasses and other forms of milk cream that used to be made. It used to be the ingredient ingredient for the local sweets. After a certain point of time, two things happened. One is the Portuguese settlement in Bengal. The Portuguese were there on the banks of Hooghly, a little away from the present-day Calcutta, in the district towns of Bandel and Hooghly as the district region. And they were there for their trading purpose, but they had an everyday life, and in their everyday life, fresh cottage cheese was a very important thing in their food specifics, in their food habit. So the Portuguese women used to make fresh cheese for their regular consumption, and it is here that really there is no specific historical record that who actually took it to the Bengali sweetmeat makers or the Moira, but the fact is that Hindu Bengalis thought the curdling of milk is inauspicious. So Portuguese are to be credited how they used way to curdle the milk. So that process is the process of influence. That is the point of influence that Portuguese had on the Bengali sweetmeat makers. And it transpired into making of chana or kesin, which is a basic ingredient of sweet in Bengal. Unlike rest of India, that fresh cottage cheese or chana is the raw ingredient. But how to make it was the influence point between the Portuguese and the Bengalis.
So how then, how you said it was like inauspicious, the separation of milk. How did the Portuguese sort of maybe convince many of the Hindu Bengalis to appropriate or accept this new process?
Oh, it becomes a little bit socially complex, because the idea of inauspicious is a very Brahminical concept. And the upper caste, more than Brahminical, it's an upper caste concept, because milk is considered as sacred or pure. So there is that whole concept of Poromanno. Poromanno means basically rice pudding, but it's also an offering to the god. So if a milk is curdled, then it is disintegrated. So in that sense, it has a metaphor of something not remaining sacred. So that is the concept which was dominant in the upper caste. But you have to understand that the Moiras belong in the hierarchy of lower caste. They are on the lower caste of the caste, so-called caste system. And for them to be open to ideas was easier than the upper caste people. So therefore, when the cooks of those Portuguese household, who would be, I think, the best catalytic people, because I don't see a Portuguese homemaker or interacting in any way with a Bengali male sweetmeat maker. Chances are zero almost. Who would be then the bridging element, the catalytic element? The cooks and the staff of a Portuguese household to the sweetmeat maker. And that is how this interaction between working class people, I am not going to go by the caste lens, I'm going to go by the class lens, and I'm going to say that this is the kind of a blending of discussion and conversation and interest of, who knows, that a cook or a khansama from a Portuguese household takes it over to the local chap, the local Moira, and that's how they try experimenting and seeing that how the milk can be curdled. And when they make that concentrate of chana, which is very brittle and which is very delicate, when they manage to kind of give shape to it, hold the thing, that you would see that Rasgulla has a very round shape, and it can tend to fall apart if it is not fresh. So how they manage that skill is where the influence happens. And because they were not from the conventional upper caste, they were open to the ideas. And religiosity in this case doesn't play very strongly on them, but because it's a question of livelihood, it's a question of innovation.
It's fascinating. There's so many fascinating little tidbits like this in your book. And another interesting section of your book I was reading was about how this sort of forced transition amongst Calcuttans from drinking initially coffee to drinking tea, and how there was even a protest movement against tea and drinking tea. So I guess my question to you is, like, why did Calcuttans adopt tea? And, was it really that they used tea to impress expat Brits at their various little social galas, or what was the catalyst there?
You see, I want to here add to the fact there was no Calcutta when the coffee drinking culture was there. It was Bengal, because Calcutta technically takes its current day shape from 1690. I am talking in this phase about the Bengal Sultanate, and the capital of which was in Murshidabad. So here was this Nawab or Nawab Nizam of Bengal, Alivardi Khan, who was a Turk by his origin. So he had introduced coffee to the Bengal court. I think Faiyaz are you there? Yeah, we lost you for a second.
I'm here. Sorry about that. I'm here.
Oh, okay, so what happened is that he had a very fine court culture, and his coffee and baristas used to come all the way from Turkey. So this coffee culture was there, but unfortunately, this coffee culture wasn't widespread. But coffee culture was pretty much there. There are records that his immediate court people drank the cup of coffee after Fajr Namaz, and it was an everyday affair. Then he would line up his day's menu. Sometimes he would even instruct his gourmet chefs that I want this in my lunch or I want this in my dinner. So he was quite a connoisseur. From there, drastically coffee disappeared. Coffee just disappeared totally from the Bengal scene. And it returns with the establishment of hotels and taverns, and coffee houses much later, so roughly around 100 years later or so, because 1757 in Bengal has a determining war, the Battle of Plassey, in which the Bengal Nizam is defeated and East India Company gains power. And say about 100 years later, when the early hotels and taverns gets established, 80 to 100 years, those have coffee coming back to as a delicate drinking session over conversation. And then towards the late 19th century, because the British colonizers were so hell-bent in popularizing tea, they start aggressively marketing tea. So coffee becomes a very eclectic choice, and tea, they understood that if you push anything into the masses, that is the only way it can become popular. Just like they did for chocolate, just like they did for coffee to the rest of Europe, it became very widespread. First, they steal things from China, as in like get the plant, and then they start the plantation in Eastern India, which is Darjeeling and Assam. I mean, the places which is still so deeply connected to tea plantations. And then they start popularizing in tea in Kolkata, because Kolkata, of course, is the first capital of the empire. So it's easier to start things there. So there's tea association, and then you have the British traders like Lipton and Brook Bond, whose name we hear, and Duncan's. All these people get into tea business because it's profitable, and they start popularizing it first in London, and then in India and Bengal, and parallelly, because the railway routes were all expanding, they were making marketing plans to have tea shops very close to the railway stations on the platforms. And that's how still today, if somebody is visiting India, they can hear that chai, the hawking sound of a typical chai wala, chai, garam chai. So that garam chai whole thing has a colonized strategy behind it of popularizing an ingredient that was giving them very quick returns.
So if coffee was a very localized sort of beverage, and with the Turkic influence, and tea being a relatively recent phenomenon, so it just occurred to me, what was the garam beverage of choice for many Bengalis, and indeed maybe like Indians as a whole, just for my own personal edification, maybe for some of the others. What was there a hot beverage of choice prior to tea? Especially if coffee was somewhat very localized?
No. the culture was in Eastern Gangetic Plain. There had been long a culture of warm milk, but Bengal is very hot and humid. So Bengalis, I really don't think Bengalis are very hot beverage kind of people, but they would have different kind of sharbats or coolants locally made, extracted from mango, extracted from other fruits, which would act. And also, even because it's so hot and humid, they would use lime, lemon, tamarind, all these local elements to make little coolants for them long summer months to beat the heat. And your other question, which I forgot to answer, is that why was there a resistance towards tea?
Right.
That's a very political thing. Political thing is that at that point of time, late 19th century and early 20th century, nothing is not political. Everything is connected to what was happening, what was the larger scenario in the society. So tea is considered as a foreign drink by the Swadeshis, by people who are in a part of nationalist movement. And there is active resistance by people like Annie Besant and Acharya Prafulla Chandra Roy and all these people who would say that, okay, tea is not to be taken, tea is not to be had. In fact, Prafulla Chandra Roy had made a very chauvinist and a very sexist comment that if women are going to drink tea, they're going to be wayward. So that was the understanding, but it's very fascinating to see that how, again, the Babus and the elites played a role, because they realized that the British and the Europeans had tea parties. So if they were to compete with them in social mobilization and the mobility going up and down, whatever, if they thought that there's a social ladder which they need to climb. So tea party is the gateway to it. So if they can invite the British officials for their tea party. So that's how tea started getting into it. And then there is something very interesting, which I must share, that as soon as tea started becoming popular, the crockeries and the elements that are needed, the culture of teapot and the teacups and saucers, all of this also started coming to this part of the world, to India, to adorn. So the homemakers realize, in my book I have mentioned, the homemaker realizes that having a range of Chinese fine china crockeries is a matter of pride. So it actually percolates into more tea drinking. But for the mass, for the working class, again, for the jute mill workers, the cotton mill workers, and other manufacturing industry, tea is given as a drink, or tea is pushed as a drink which can hold their appetite. They can be had as a quick little drink, and they can work for longer hours. Till today, if you meet construction workers as in Bengal, mostly because it's a very rigorous work that they do, that they would be drinking tea every 1 hour or 2 hours to beat the appetite, because they have a certain meal hour and they can't afford intermittent meals. So tea will act as a deterrent. The caffeine will act as a deterrent.
Maybe somewhat less dangerous than smoking, maybe, but
yeah, but the purpose is again very deeply political and deeply related to colonialism, and the purpose is to push a product, push an ingredient which is not natural to the region, and completely for the sake of profit. And this we know worldwide how colonialism had done it with other ingredients, including sugar also.
Right. So somewhat related to that, there's this concept of hybridity. It's a running theme in your book, as this notion, as you mentioned a little earlier, newcomers recreating their homelands in and around Calcutta. And I couldn't help but think of the parallels, with migration stories of today. So back then, what made Calcutta such a welcoming place that allowed it to be a sort of home away from home for many, and really one of the world's early great multicultural cities?
I think it's profit, simply put as profit. If you have a trading post, and if you are seeing that there is a huge amount of business, purely revenue being generated from this city, you would have people coming to this place. Today, even today, when people migrate, I think the essential reason for migration is looking out for a better life in general, other than political complexities, etc. So wherever people are migrating, somebody is migrating to United States, somebody is migrating to other European nations, people are migrating other than complex political reason. The basic and the most common reason to migrate is a better life. And when we conceive better life in 17th century, it would be a trading post. So once Charnock chooses Calcutta and the city develops, and there's humongous amount of trade happening through Calcutta, because we have to remember that it's one of the most important ports of Asia at that point of time. Calcutta, Surat, and then on the eastern side, in China, Shanghai, and all these places. These are important port cities, and port cities, for sure, they lure people. They lure people because there are so much of possibilities. And a growing city like Calcutta, because Calcutta was called St. Petersburg at that point of time, of the East, and also in the Urdu reference as the Jannat. So if you're using that kind of a comparison, or you are giving that epithet to a city, then it means that there is something which is like a beehive pulling people towards it. But to me, it's essentially the capitalist base of the British Empire, and the capital is drawing people. And everything is interconnected. The Armenians, of course, I must say, and I don't know if I ever get a chance, I would like to write about the Armenian history in Kolkata, also the Afghan history. So Armenians are very early people in the city. They're even earlier than the British. They were pretty much there in negotiating different kind of trading certifications with the Mughal Empire and the British. They were playing a role. So they have a very rich history, and from them we also get a very famous, from them and the Turkish influence, we get a very famous dish, the dolma, the Turkish dolma, which I have not mentioned in the book because I was mentioning more about the European and the Muslim influences. But the dolma in Bengal is usually a stuffed vegetable of minced meat, and I think I'm forgetting the English for it, of a kind of a green vegetable that we use, which is called parval in Hindi and potul in Bengali. We stuff the minced meat inside, and it's like bharwa karela or bitter gourd, but with a smoother skin. And you would be fascinated that for the Hindu widows, we would omit the minced meat and we would use grated coconut to make the filling, so that they are also not deprived of the pleasure because of the religious reasons, since they can't have meat and fish and certain things in their widowhood. This newer hybrid thing, such as the hybridity, that these kind of newer things are innovated. And then again, the most fascinating part of these innovations are that sometimes, and most of the times, it's the Khanshamas and the Rakabdas who, out of their own innovation and imagination, and the Oriya Thakurs, are continuously trying to please their employers. And that's how actually things are being made and remade. And in another sense, the word hybridity is important because Bengalis were a section of the Bengalis were not open to the idea of new food. The new food like having of meat, the having of different kind of bakeries, having different kind of new fruits. Like, for example, there's a lot of references of fruit puddings, strawberry pudding, peach pudding, this pudding, that pudding. There's pilaf, which has oranges, pineapple. They were not open to these. Once they were open and once they were experimenting, it also means that there is an alteration in their current food habit. And that I think we can consider it as hybrid. We can say that it's hybrid, that essential mixing of things.
Well, thank you for that interesting tidbit about the Armenians and the grape leaves, which I think is maybe what you were possibly referring to. And that made me think of, there's a dish, and maybe it's a...
I remember the name of the vegetable. It's called pointed goat. I will send you a picture of it.
So that kind of reminded me of like another dish called patra. I don't know if that, I think that's more like Gujarati, and that there's some obvious parallels with the grape leaf type of the gadol type of thing.
It is. And before we move on to the next and the last question, I guess, is we have a dish called paturi, where we have the fish, the baked fish or the hilsa, steamed and folded in a little parcel of banana leaf. Yeah. That is there in Kerala also, but with different ingredient. But we have that, and what you are saying that in Gujarat also there's patra, that's a Parsi dish which influences the Gujarati cuisine as far as I know. But in Bengal, because again, from your first question, that everything is related to geography, there's so abundance of fish that innovations are also mostly done with the local ingredients, what is readily available. So if it is readily available, we are innovating with that.
Well, let me get to that final question, because I think it's an important one, and then maybe we can open up the questions to the gathered. Much of the latter portions of your book, focuses on women and education. So I wanted to ask you, how did that play a role in creating a new food order, as you say, in Calcutta?
I think most of food history worldwide has started acknowledging women as an important factor in transforming cuisines, adding things, innovating, in their presence of gendered labor force. All of that comes into discussion. But in terms of understanding Bengali cuisine, women enter in the scholarship also and in the discussion fairly late. In my book, I have tried to bring their contribution in a little more in a defined manner, because I think, and I personally believe, not only think, I believe, unless women try out things in their kitchen at a mass level, each household, each family where women are generally in charge of the kitchen matters, unless they agree to cook a certain dish or use a certain ingredient. For example, the potato, which is a very late entrant in Bengali household, and now it is one of the most important vegetables without which almost no dish is made. I mean, lots of dishes are made which has potato as one of the ingredients. If the women didn't accept it, it wouldn't have been popular. However, a Nawab, however the elite men or the influences would have been, it's the women who has to finally accept a particular new ingredient or a new food. That's one contribution. The other contribution, of course, you will see in my book, we have some very less number of photographs, but we have 30 odd photographs of different cuisines. And there's this lovely Calcutta Shahi biryani. sitting on the plate with a very creamy looking potato, which is integral. And you must have gone through that section where I mentioned how potato came into the Kolkata biryani. So I think the ingredients are the first, women and the ingredients are the first thing which we must stress here. And the other thing is the school education. The school education and the printing press both allowed women to open up with their imagination of writing recipes. I mentioned there that in the magazines, the first batch of Bengali magazines, family magazines, cultural magazines, and I mentioned of Bama Bodhini and other early magazines printed in Bengali, where the editors are encouraging women to send their recipe. So by doing that, by thinking about food, by actively imagining how they can make a certain dish, they are actually participating in the changing order of the food. And if two women, or if a group of small group of women would get together in a family function, they would discuss about food. And then there's another round of influence which comes in through the manuals which the male authors are creating, and the cookbooks which tell them that, okay, you can cook a dish in a certain way, and you can do this, you can do that. And that those manuals which actually are constantly telling them that if you want to be a great homemaker and please your husband and please your in-laws, you should know a certain range. The first and foremost, it could be a pressure on them to fulfill that role. But by doing that also, they end up in innovation. And that's how they start influencing the current palate. And I personally think that the cookbook authors, the women cookbook authors, are great influence on the large section of women who can read and write. So they can readily read a cookbook by, I mentioned there, Proga Shundari and other people who are writing cookbooks. And so this is this to and fro communication which is happening. Women are also sending their recipes, talking about food, talking about pantry management. And then there are cookbooks which are coming up one after the other, which is influencing them to experiment, to innovate and do things. And they're first, and I must credit Bengali women that they're open to the idea of cooking a certain thing. That religiosity, that superstition, or any kind of presumption is not holding them back after a point of time. By the time it's 1920s and 30s, they are accepting so many things which they wouldn't have even 50 years before. Or they have already accepted different kind of use of masalas. They're making in fried rice, they're making pulao in their own style. I mentioned how they use ghee, because they think that it's par the cultural norm to use ghee as something sacred, and they're not disbalancing, and yet they are innovating.
Yeah, so food in a way kind of became a religion for them as well, right?
Yes, I would say that. And I would say also it becomes their space of imagination. It opens up their canvas of being able to do something of their own. So time and again, when they're sending recipes and they're getting selected and they're given a little prize money for that, it's a tremendous boost to their confidence that we can do something. So it's an act of resistance also from that very idea that you learn cooking and you just only serve your in-laws and your family and feed your children. And they break away from their norm as they start developing recipes, developing dishes, form a little kitty party. Of all of these are acts of resistance, little acts of resistance. And that happens to a section of the women who are able to study, who are able to go to school education. So they get access to printed books and things like that. And I also mentioned about Bengal's first autobiography writer, Rasho Sundari Devi, who learns to read and write from a religious text and who manages a huge household in present-day Bangladesh in Faridpur. And how, on the contrary, cooking becomes a burden for us. So we have to consider both sides. We have to continuously look at both sides.
Well, it's a fascinating book. I thoroughly enjoyed reading it. I'm going to just put it up here for people to see. It's called Calcutta on Your Plate. Nilosree, we have a few minutes left, and there are some questions coming in from some of the people who've gathered here online. One question here from Pooja Shanbag. It asks, what did the ancient indigenous food culture of Calcutta look like before any external influences changed the food landscape?
I have referred in my book from 14th, 15th century, from Mangal Kavya, which is a medieval literature of Bengal. And I have mentioned the creator of Vaishnavism, like the leader of Vaishnavism in Bengal, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who's born around that period. And there's a reference of food, and there's reference of what kind of food is eaten there, a large range of palette there. And again, in the Mangal Kavya, we see different castes, because it's a very casteist society. It was a casteist society. So we have various kinds of food. The merchant class, we have a full description of the platter of the merchant class. And then we again have a description of the hunting or the indigenous community eating a different kind of a food. And in fact, there's a eulogy literature on goddess Chandi, who is a variation of the mother goddess form, and how she actually blesses this poor resourceless hunter couple and bestows them with her blessing of abundance. So it's very categorically in which society and which strata you belong in the society that you will be eating a certain thing. Leftover is not something which is consumed by the upper caste. It's the lower caste which will consume leftover and different kind of meats. The upper caste has a more dairy-based and fish-based and fresh food kind of a thing. It is only natural that if you are a hunter couple and if your proceeds are not fully sold on a market day, it will be left with you. So it is natural that you will be consuming in food of that kind. So we have reference of turtle meat, we have reference of porcupine and all of that. Yeah. And then we have this divine intervention where they get the blessing of abundance. That is in Chondi Mongol Kabbo in 16th century.
I know we only have a couple of minutes, and Kirsten, Elizabeth, please let me know if you need to get in here, but we do have one other question from Matthew Petty from local station WMFE, formerly of. Anyway, he asks, can you talk about the evolution of the use of garlic and onions in Bengali cuisine?
Yes, we get a reference of garlic and onion in the first cookbook of India, which is Banjan Ratnakar, and I mentioned there that Biprodash Mukhopadhyay, who is the cookbook author, he has a very self-contradicting opinion about onion and garlic. At times he suggests that onion is so integral in khichdi, which is also a favorite of the colonizers who came in, and at times he is actually very harsh towards using onion and garlic, because especially garlic, because they are of pungent smell, and he even goes to the extent that you will lose your caste position in the society if you are going to use garlic. And yet the contradiction is so evident that in many of the recipes he himself suggests that garlic is also an essential ingredient without which you cannot do. So I think he was he had a very modern mind. He didn't want to lose his readership. So sometimes he is balancing with the fact by saying, pleasing his upper caste readership by saying, no, don't use garlic. They're not to be used for you guys. And then sometimes he is saying, no, you must use onion for this kind of khichdi. You can't do without onion because you lose the flavor. So it's very tricky. It's very tricky how it is. But eventually, when post Wajid Ali Shah and when Pulao and Lucknow is actually, before we sign off, Lucknow is one of those regions where biryani was never popular. It's the pulao which was more popular because they felt that cooking is art. And cooking, if it is art, it cannot be overloaded with spices. Unlike,
less is more.
Less is more. So they have humongous range of pulao and very fine moti pulao and navratna pulao and this pulao, that pulao. So it is after the pulao and biryani and all these loosely termed Mughlai food. I wouldn't call it Mughlai food. Actually, Awadhi food became popular, that all the khada masala and the use of onion and the use of garlic is pretty much there. Till today in Bengal, there are some dishes which are cooked conventionally minus garlic and onion. And there would be the same thing which would be cooked with onion and garlic. So there are variations.
Well, thank you so very much, Nilosree. It's been very educational, very fascinating. Kirsten, Leila, I can maybe hand it over back to you, but I wanted to thank you again so much for this very very enlightening discussion.
Thank you so much, Faiyaz. Your questions were amazing. I was almost thinking whether I'll be able to answer them.
You did so very well. Thank you.
Thank you both,
Thank
Nilosree
you.
and Faiyaz.
Thank you very much, Faiyaz and Nilosree, for this really fascinating historical discussion on Bengali food this morning. And it's really left me wanting to explore more Bengali food. And I'd also like to thank our viewers who joined in today. If you'd like to hear more about future India Center events at UCF, please join our mailing list online at theindiacenter.ucf.edu. We do have a couple of upcoming events in the next 2 weeks, one virtual, which is just next week on India's transition to digital healthcare, and then an in-person event on campus featuring a discussion on India's partition, which will be in 2 weeks. So I hope to see some of you there. Thank you all again so much.
Thank you so much, Leela, for having me here. Thank you. Thank you, Kristen. Thank you, Faiyaz. See you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.